Kia ora koutou, mauri ora ki te whare. My name is Kiri West, he uri tēnei no Parehauraki whānui, ko Ngāti Maru Tuahu, Ngāti Whanaunga me Ngāti Tamatera oku iwi. Kia ora. Welcome and thank you all for sticking through right to this part. It's been a really full-on couple of days, and I realised that kind of, going through and sitting, through all these talks can be a lot to absorb, especially when it's all new information. So I appreciate having some friendly faces in the crowd. And also just thank you to Maui and Natalie for providing the opportunity for me to, I guess, come out of my siloed research office where I sit by myself and think about these things and have an opportunity to maybe test some of these ideas and see what they, I better start the timer, see what they look like and how they land in a different environment. So I've been working as part of TINT in RA3, which, as we've kind of heard today, has been largely focused on algorithms and AI and the application or potential for tikanga within those spaces. And I guess just for a bit of context, I am based at Waipapa Taumataro at the University of Auckland, and I am a lecturer in communication. But that's not my research field. I was socialised and disciplined in sociology and politics, and my PhD was looking at theorising data sovereignty in Aotearoa, and I was looking at storytelling, and in particular the way that my nan's stories about growing up on the pa might kind of help with sense-making and meaning-making when we're trying to, I guess, navigate Māori data sovereignty. So then I find myself in this research stream with a bunch of data scientists and computer scientists, and I feel really out of my depth, and I wonder how I can make a meaningful contribution in that space, and it's something that I grappled with through the duration of the project. But with some encouragement from other members of the team, what I come to realise is that as much as technology is about systems and I guess algorithms and tools and software and hardware and all that stuff I don't really understand, at its core it's about people. And I guess that's where I have a unique perspective to add into this stream. That's just a bit of context as to why what should potentially be a more technical report is maybe a little bit more people-focused. So the particular report that I was asked to contribute to or to write has a question that should be up on the screen but isn't at the moment. And that question was, what tools, processes, mechanisms create transformative ecosystems for Indigenous data that enable ethical use and generate equitable benefits? Which is a really big question. And for me, that required me to take a step back and really think about what are the main objectives, what is this question actually trying to achieve, and how can I give structure to this report. So from that, I came up with these 4 overlapping objectives. The first is about the transformative ecosystems. And I think it's really important in the first instance to maybe have a think and a discussion about what we mean when we talk about transformation and what is an ecosystem. Because we've all been in spaces where we're sitting in a room and we're all speaking the same language and we think we're all on the same kaupapa and we're even using the same words, but for some reason we're talking past each other. And I think Larissa's talk yesterday, where we kind of thought about this idea of consent and what it looks like and how it operates, was a really clear example of that. So I want to spend some time doing some definition work. The second objective is about the tools, processes, and mechanisms. And I will kind of be touching upon these briefly, but I think that we've kind of had a really good discussion over the past, or I guess a good we've had lots of opportunities to hear about some of these things in practice. So I won't go into too much detail about that, but Dani's also going to add some specifics there as well. So there's that objective. Enabling ethical use and generating equitable benefits was an interesting one because that requires a lot of foresight and a lot of that stuff about future-proofing and how we move from this space of mechanisms and processes into something practical and applied. And that is an area where I had a little bit of difficulty. And then finally, what are the current gaps? Where is the room for growth? Where is the room for development? Where is the room for more research? As well as identifying the core objectives, I thought it was also important to have a why. Why is this mahi important? And I think we know that data and technology are advancing at this really rapid pace. And when I was writing the introduction of my thesis and, getting ready to submit it, that's essentially what I was saying back then. So it seems to me that it's not slowing down. I don't think it will. There continues to be a significant investment funneled into technology and data-driven solutions. And I guess what sits behind that is this logic that if we invest in these areas, then they can and will yield future benefits, such as reducing healthcare inequities or growing the economy or enabling faster decision-making, improving access to information. And I feel that these are really ambitious and audacious goals, and if done right, do potentially have, there is an opportunity there for that to have significant benefit for Māori. But there is also this evidence that exists that tells us that the distribution of burdens and benefits of technology are uneven. And while Māori data is likely to be a significant contributor to these innovations, Māori are among those least likely to benefit from them. But we also know that the uneven distribution of burdens and benefits across society is not something that is new and is something that isn't created by technology, but is potentially exacerbated by it. Māori and Indigenous scholars alike have been calling for transformation of the status quo. But what does this transformation look like from a Māori perspective, and how might these ideas be applied to data and technology? So there are lots of ways that you can think about transformation, and for this report I thought it was appropriate to begin with kaupapa Māori. And weirdly enough, as I was beginning this research process, it took me a long time to get to that point. And I was talking to my friends well, I've got to theorise transformation, and then it just occurred to me, and I thought, what a dum-dum. Transformation has been part of the discussion of kaupapa Māori for a long time, so that's the perfect place to start. But even with that specific theoretical base of kaupapa Māori, there still is diversity in perspective and application of this idea. And that's why I thought this visualisation from Graham Smith was really useful, because it acknowledges that transformation is not linear and it isn't one thing, it's a process or a series of processes, and that we're probably going to jump in and out of conscientisation and transformative action and resistance and maybe occupy multiple spaces all at once. It isn't hierarchical, and all actions can contribute to the broader goal. So applied to tikanga and technology, and tikanga in technology, with a broader aspiration for mana motuhake, we can think of transforming data ecosystems as a spectrum, ranging from capacity building, supporting Māori in utilising emerging technologies, to adapting technologies to support Indigenous aspirations and rights, and further again to developing the technologies for the purpose of achieving tino rangatiratanga and mana motuhake. So with that basis, I thought it was important to identify some, even though there's kind of no unanimous or one vision of what transformation is, maybe there's some threads. And I think to return to that point of the one vision, there can be a real temptation to conflate a desire for a shared vision, so a shared aspiration of mana motuhake, with a sense of homogeneity among Māori and the way that Māori think. But as we know, Māori are not homogenous, which means there isn't a unanimous agreement on the path we might take for achieving our aspirations, which is actually kind of stink, because my job writing this report would be way easier if we all could agree. But anyway, there are some common threads. So one thing that's clear is that transformation requires more than minor tweaks to existing systems. And this reminds me of something that I heard our rangatira Moana Jackson say once, and if I pronounce one of these words wrong, you can mind your business. But it's that incrementalism is the star sister transformation. And what I took from that is that if we're only making such teeny tiny little steps that don't outpace or that are outpaced by the environment, then those little steps will be absorbed by the machine and they won't achieve the real outcomes that we're wanting for transformation. And this ties back into what was said yesterday, that we have to dream big and be ambitious and have amazing goals, because if we don't, then we will be eclipsed, right? We will be eclipsed in this space because it is happening, everything's happening so quickly. And so imagination is a really core part of transformation, and I think we have to have the opportunity to dream big, and that ties into the final thread, which is that transformation requires time. We can be really excited and want to jump on the waka and have a voice at the table, but sometimes we need an opportunity to pause. And we need time, attention, and resources. These are crucial factors in realising transformative outcomes, especially for New Zealand's data ecosystem. We have this rapid proliferation of data ecosystems and technologies, and that means that time isn't necessarily a luxury we're being presented with. But transforming data ecosystems to achieve better outcomes for Māori requires significant investment and long-term perspective. Time is required to invest in developing deep Māori expertise, to advance data science research, create new strategic collaborations between data science researchers and end users, and increasing data science research capability and capacity in Māori communities. And I think this is an opportunity to highlight the way that the Tikanga and Technology Project has provided the resources that have enabled focused attention on key issues during a critical time period. This time and attention has contributed to the development and production of the things we've heard about over the past 2 days, including the Māori Privacy Framework, application of the biocultural labels, and principles for Māori algorithmic sovereignty. By reshaping the current data ecosystem to align with kaupapa Māori transformative approaches, Māori are moving away from reactionary politics and instead focusing on purposeful actions that prioritise self-development, mana motuhake, and the reclamation of our own cultural and data practices. So, the next definition, what is an ecosystem? I think that probably intuitively we could think that we know what an ecosystem is, and chances are we will probably in our mind have an image that's drawn forward, and maybe that's a ngahere, or maybe that's a awa, or maybe that's like a little bit smaller, like a particular rākau in a ngahere and its specific ecosystem or whatever. But I think that sometimes it's a little bit more complex than that simple vision that we might bring forward. So, the ecosystem is a metaphor that's drawn from nature, and it has become a really popular way of characterising the behaviours and relationships in areas of modern life where social and technical processes intersect in complex ways. They comprise networks and sets of networks that exchange, produce, provide and consume data and other related resources. Within an ecosystem, organisations, institutions, and in some cases individuals can be classified as actors with the authority and responsibility for setting rules. Then there are stakeholders, and those are the people or the groups who are affected by these rules. But the relationship isn't necessarily so clear-cut. You're not either an actor or a stakeholder. You can shift between the two. But even then, to be simply affected by rules as a stakeholder is not a good enough term to describe the specific role or position that Māori would have within Aotearoa's data ecosystem. So it's important that we include rights holders as people who have legal and moral rights that are distinctive, and the basis of those rights in Aotearoa for Māori are in te tiriti. So, in their description of an ecosystem, Howard and Highland Wood said there are two core elements, right? The first is that they can emerge spontaneously. So they respond to an event that's happening in the wider environment. And that spontaneity can result in a mature data ecosystem that's adaptive and open and scalable, sustainable. And because it's emerged in response to something, it's fit for purpose, right? It's made exactly for that thing. But it can also create the conditions for more emergent data ecosystems, which can be categorised by a lack of clear institutional leadership and norms, uncoordinated data collection and representation, poor data governance, and inadequate compliance monitoring. Now, if I was in my lecture hall right now, I might pull out, I don't know, some kind of prize and say, anyone want to hazard a guess as to where New Zealand sits in this space? And I don't think it'll be a surprise to anyone that our data ecosystem is described as emergent or having low maturity. And if we look across the political landscape, there aren't really any signals that we'll be exploring opportunities to firm up the legislative environment. For example, the drive to develop AI technologies is accompanied by a promise that there won't be harsh, restrictive regulation put in place down the track to limit that development. And they call this a soft approach to legislation. An emergent ecosystem like this is really challenging to navigate, and it makes marrying things up difficult because often those networks that are supposed to kind of exchange, produce, provide and consume data and other related resources, they're not talking to each other, right? It isn't clear what actually exists in that ecosystem, which does actually create an opportunity for intervention. And this is where we can really profile the range of activities happening which strengthen our Māori data ecosystems and enhance Māori control over Māori data, including a lot of the initiatives and things that have been discussed over the past couple of days. The second core element of ecosystems is that they display heightened or radical interdependencies between their components. So what that simply means is that any decision that happens here within the ecosystem doesn't just affect what's happening in proximity, direct proximity to that ecosystem, it's a ripple effect. So it moves out. Everything is affected by everything else. And I kind of like that focus on relationality and radical interdependencies because it moves us away from seeing things like data governance as top-down, linear, or unidirectional. And instead, we can consider the potential for actions, large and small, but not easily consumed by the machine, to have a cumulative or compounding effect in transforming our data ecosystems. So that creates greater opportunities to think broadly about what a decentered approach to the development of data policy and access to decision-making might look like. And we can kind of think about the progress and socialisation and impact of the principles of Māori data sovereignty here as ways of kind of seeing how over time the principles have had this effect of kind of policy setting by action. So we haven't waited for things to happen in the kind of legislative or political realm, but we have had these kind of small wins that have kind of accumulated so that we're here all together talking about our future, which is pretty cool. And then the last thing that kind of got me quite excited and resonated with me when I was thinking about data ecosystems is this idea of a keystone species. So in an environmental setting, keystone species perform some vital function that is critical to the health of the ecosystem. And the absence of a keystone species is not sustainable and often results in an unhealthy ecology. It's my belief that many data ecosystems in Aotearoa are currently trying to operate in the absence of an essential keystone species. And the poor health of these ecosystems is evidenced by the recurring failings often brought to the fore. So here we can think about increased or heightened surveillance, algorithmic bias or data exploitation, tensions between individual and collective rights. And these are just a couple of examples of these failings. And for me, that keystone species that's missing is Māori data sovereignty or Māori data governance or tikanga. And you might be thinking, but Kiri, you said that the Māori data sovereignty principles have been well socialised and everything's cool. And yes, absolutely, that's happened, the work is being done. But sometimes what can happen is without a very, connected response. When something isn't clear, when there's no clear roadmap, what can happen is that organisations or institutions can pick up these principles and there's an enthusiastic uptake of the tangas. We've all heard about manaakitanga and rangatiratanga and kaitiakitanga within kind of political spaces or policy documents. But often what happens is when we realise what it means to give effect to Māori data sovereignty or Māori data governance, there's a realisation that that comes with giving up some power, and all of a sudden it's in the too hard basket. So that's why it's important that we remember transformation is about more than just those minor tweaks around the edge of a system. So in keeping with the theme of this gathering, which has been about asking questions, not giving answers, I want to know what would a data ecosystem look like if Māori data sovereignty, Māori data governance and tikanga were the keystone species. And I think Dani's going to kind of talk to that a little bit more just in terms of the way that some mechanisms and processes do incorporate tikanga and how that's kind of quite interesting and how we can explore that in a practical sense. But before we get to there, I'm going to give you like 3 more definitions, and I promise I'll be fast. Because that's what we need, is more definitions. So first, what is a mechanism? That is what provides high-level governance for the maintenance of networks and relationships within the data ecosystem. These can be kind of those real broad, overarching things like UNDRIP, Te Tiriti should be on there. They can be nation-specific laws, so things that like the Privacy Act or cybersecurity law, as well as extra legal levers, which include, say, the CARE principles for data governance or the Māori data governance model. And I will say that sometimes it's not a clear distinction and that mechanisms sound like processes, and then there's tools which have processes. So maybe just go away and think about your own definitions in that sense as well. Processes give practical effect to the mechanisms. They add granularity and specificity, which enable the mechanisms to be meaningful in context. So these can include things like guidelines, frameworks, and organisation-specific policy or best practice models. And then I think when I got to tools, as I'm writing up this report, this is where I realised, and it probably is the most important part of the report, but these are the things that I have less awareness of. So it's not to say that there aren't great tools being developed. These are the things, the hardware and software that enable the production, transmission, sharing and use of data. There certainly are. We've heard about them today, but I wasn't aware of them. And perhaps the reason for that is because at the moment our ecosystem isn't functioning well. Things aren't talking well to each other, and we're not aware of everything and all the activities that are happening. And an environment where like Kay Marie was saying, our plates are full and we've got to address the issues that are facing us in the immediacy. Where are we supposed to find the time to kind of learn how these things talk to each other, and how do we avoid reinventing the wheel? We have to shore up our data ecosystems. And how do we do that? Well, I think we have to bring it back to imagination and having audacious goals, and really kind of thinking about the big picture, thinking about future-proofing. What are the different technologies that are required for Māori to be able to meaningfully participate in our data ecosystem here in Aotearoa? I don't have the answer to that, but I'm told that that's okay. It's, I think, really important that we start thinking. There's a lot of work that's been done in mechanisms and processes, and work still needs to be done in those places. But I think there are knowledge and implementation gaps that sit in the tool space that need to be addressed in order for us to really shore up our ecosystems, our data ecosystems. And some of that is simply about finding the language that makes all of this, data and technology, Māori data sovereignty, all of these concepts meaningful for our own whānau. I've been trying to talk to my whānau for the past, 5 to 10 years, probably 5 years, about Māori data sovereignty, and I don't think the language of the institution is providing any conceptual clarity for my whānau. And scaremongering doesn't seem to work either, so I don't know what to do at this point. But I think I'll just end with this point here, which is that it can be really overwhelming to kind of think about all the work that needs to be done, and if ecosystems are so complex, then how are we going to affect any real change? But we should take comfort in the fact that the structure of an ecosystem is, by definition, subject to change, growth, and evolution or revolution. In this case, transformation is to be expected, and we should expect that they, ecosystems, adjust and are adjusted in relation to each other, always attempting but possibly never quite achieving the perfect fit. This is part of the dynamic balance achieved in healthy ecosystems. It's a balance that's found in motion, not stillness. Ka mihi.
Well, tēnā koe, Kiri. And we'll just wait for my slides to come up. But tuatahi, e rere ana oku mi ki ngā kai whakahaere e tēnei hui, ki ngā kai kōrero ko kōrero ke, and kia koutou katoa e hui hui mai nei. Ko ai au e mihi ana, he uri ahau no Ngāti Rangi Nui me Ngāti Raukawa, ko Lucas tuku whānau, ko Dani ahau. Kia ora everyone, I'm Danielle, or Dani, and I'm here today to talk to you about how Tikanga Māori and Mātauranga Māori can inform the construction of digital identities in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Now, when starting this project, apart from being a lot intimidated, I was excited to explore all the different aspects that come in this question. Māori identity, all the diverse parts of identity, how digital identities work, how tikanga and mātauranga is explored in the digital space, and how this can apply to digital identity. And that's roughly the outline I'll talk you through today. While reflecting on these concepts of the old and the new, I found a whakatauki that eventually inspired the title of this report, Protecting the Heartwood. This whakatauki can be translated as an ancient tree with sapwood clinging to the outside, and only the heartwood is standing firm. Whoops, hope you didn't need that. In one sense, this whakatauki is used to describe our kaumātua, whose bodies may be frail, but whose knowledge, experience and guidance remain strong. Kaumātua are the holders of our mātauranga, tikanga, whakapapa, reo, and therefore the holders of our iwi, hapu and Māori identities. In this report, the heartwood we are trying to protect is that which our kaumātua hold, our identities, tikanga and mātauranga, while the sapwood shifts from the physical realm to the digital realm. It reminds us not to forget the treasures of our elders or our ways while things change. Because over time, Māori identities have changed, our tikanga has adapted, and our mātauranga has grown. So as described by Dean Mahuta, identity is like an organism. It's in constant state of flux, and as it comes into contact with another element, its form has changed. Māori identity is no different. So, when our ancestors left Hawaii, they came into contact with unfamiliar territory and navigated new oceans. Once arriving here in Aotearoa, our ancestors adapted to and learnt from the whenua. Looking to the manu, maunga, rākau, the people changed their ways to reflect their new homeland. The environment became infused in the culture and the language, creating unique mātauranga and tikanga, or a unique body of knowledge, way of being, and identity. In the 1800s, once again, these ancestors adapted and their identity shifted. With the arrival of whalers, missionaries, and settlers, hapu needed a communal word to distinguish themselves, and they chose the word for natural or normal, Māori. Māori identified and re-identified themselves as new systems challenged their ways of being. The kingitanga, the rural to urban drift, all of these things shifted Māori identities. Currently, there are many forms of Māori identity and many things that impact our identities. According to the multidimensional model of Māori identity and cultural engagement, things such as age, soul or mixed identity, or your urban or rural location can impact this. Along with all of these things, Māori identities of the 21st century, of course, are influenced by the digital age. From connecting with friends, renewing a passport, or shopping, more and more of the world's services and our lives are moving online. As the world becomes more digital, these identities once again shift, this time not from one whenua to another, but from physical to digital. Now, identifying yourself has always been a part of society, both to express who you are and to prove that you are who you say you are to other people. Our intrinsic identities are those which we use when we're identifying ourselves. For example, our political, philosophical, and cultural identities. These intrinsic identities are created by the individual or the community and changed by the individual or the community. Our extrinsic identities, on the other hand, are what others use, usually organisations, to identify us. These distinct forms of identity can also exist in the digital realm, in the form of digital identity, being our intrinsic identity, and digital identification, being that of extrinsic identity. Digital identity is defined as a set of electronically captured and stored attributes and credentials that can uniquely identify a person. These include everything that you put online, from what you post on social media accounts to your browsing history. While digital identification, on the other hand, is the process of validating a person's digital identity. So digital identity is what makes yourself you online, while digital identification shows someone else that you are, that you claim to be. Although these two forms of identity are often linked, they can be distinct, and the big difference between them is who controls what you are, who controls the definition of identity. For example, legislation in both Aotearoa and overseas has forced Indigenous communities to identify themselves through the lens of the West. In Canada, the Indian Act deprived Indian women who married non-status men of their native status, while in Aotearoa, New Zealand, blood quantum laws define someone as Māori only if they had half or more blood. Now, although these legislative restrictions on indigeneity have been removed, distinct cultural intrinsic and extrinsic identities remain. For example, in Canada, you can still be classified as a status or non-status native, while in Aotearoa, someone may affiliate with an iwi, but may not be registered with that iwi, meaning that the iwi does not recognise them necessarily, or formally, that is. These different forms of identity overlap and intertwine. An interesting use case to explore this is Marae Facebook pages. Māori communities have used these to connect online and share, organise and grow, and this is one of my Marae Facebook pages. Marae, as you all know, are a huge part of Māori identity because they are how we literally identify ourselves, and they're also how we connect to others. An interesting point about marae, their Facebook pages and their digital twins, is that they're part of our communal identity. They belong to the many. Marae also hold a lot of information about our identities, and their carvings, weavings, and names, so they also need to be accessed by the many. These digital representations of our communal identity demonstrate how a communal identity online can greatly impact individual identity. For example, me, living overseas, can still participate in marae affairs. They also demonstrate how our communal identity online can impact that identity for that community in real life. For example, with these pages, marae can shift how they function, from getting input from people overseas to trying to discuss how to conduct tangihanga and pōhiri online. This also shows the complexity of managing a digital space, which in the real world is steeped in both tikanga and mātauranga. How can we protect these taonga while providing access to the many? Such access could be provided using secure and safe digital identification. So how, very briefly and probably pretty quickly, does digital identification work today? Firstly, there is the service user. These are the individuals, entities, or communities that want to access a service, information, or just to identify themselves. So for example, this could be an iwi logging onto tūhono to access iwi-specific data. However, the digital identification system is wider than just the individual or community who wants to prove who they are. There's also the service provider who provides access to the service, and they need to make sure that the service user is who they say they are before allowing them access to a service. This could be a bank, a social media platform, or a government. An example of this is an iwi that provides, say, a members-only section of their website that you can log on to and access information like AGM minutes. In this case, the iwi is the service provider, not the service user. The member is the service user. And lastly, but not least, is the identity verifier. This organisation verifies, confirms, and sometimes stores the service user's information and provides this information to the service provider. For example, this could be an iwi verifying someone's whakapapa to a third party. In this case, the iwi is the verifier. Now, all these players, there are roughly 4 steps to construct a digital identity. So step 1, registration. To create a digital identity, the service user must register and create an account. In this process, you're usually asked a whole bunch of questions, like personal information, your name, your email, your age, your address. And in doing so, you are laying claim to an identity. In step 2, somebody verifies this identity. So this is usually the service provider or the verifier that ensures that the service user's information is correct and that their identity is unique in their systems. This identity can be verified in a range of ways. Through an email verification link, which you're probably all very familiar with, a unique code, or in more formal identification methods. This can be done by showing a physical ID, providing some biometric information, or cross-referencing one's claim with a validated database. For example, when you set up your Realme account, your information is matched to other government databases to ensure you are who you claim to be. Completing this step means that the service user has their identity registered and stored. Step 3, issuance. Now, in this step, the service user is issued credential information, which is linked to the already created account. Now, as described by the World Bank, there are 3 main buckets that this credential information can fall into. It can be something you have, so that's like a card or a mobile app or a security token. It can be something you know, such as a password or a PIN, or even an answer to a question. Or it can be something you are, like your biometric data, such as face, iris, or fingerprint scans. In this step, whatever credential information you're issued is attached to your registered account and is what you use to then log on to that service. In step 4, which doesn't always exist, but most of the time it does these days, is when the service user is given an authentication factor. These are sent to the service user to confirm they are who they claim to be. This can be an additional step, as I just mentioned. Lots of you would have encountered two-factor authentication or had to answer a security question or your bank when you're transferring some money. That's all authentication stuff. You've already proved who you are, you've already done all your digital identification. This is the extra step to make sure you are still who you say you are. In summary, in each step during the construction of digital identification, important and personal information about the service user is collected. And in different models of digital identification system, different players hold this information. Oh, so that's what you get if you do all of that, access to service. So we'll just briefly look at some diverse identity models that exist out there. So the first is a centralised model. This is when you have one digital identification for each service, username or password, an email address. An example of this is logging onto Facebook. A user-centric model is when there's one digital identification that the consumer or customer already has that can be used for multiple services. For example, using that Facebook account to then log into your Instagram or your Google. The federated model is one digital identification that can be used for multiple services. It's like your real me that you can also use an IRD, or sometimes you can use it to open up a bank account. And lastly, the decentralized system. This is when one digital identification can be used for all services. But importantly, the difference between each of these is where the information sits. In the first two examples, the service provider holds the information. And the third example, the verifier does. And then the last one, the service user themselves holds the information. Now, looking to all of that process and trying to figure out how digital identities is constructed, I realised that there are a lot of connections between digital identification and other areas of the digital landscape. As the digital landscape continues to develop, these connections have become, as Kiri might say, radically independent on each other. If we are going to transform data ecosystems, this needs to be done in the context of the other transformations happening in the data ecosystem. So, I looked at what models already exist out there that incorporate tikanga into technology. These frameworks are a range of both processes and mechanisms, as Kiri defined. These frameworks are designed with Māori communities to varying extents and help guide Māori and non-Māori practitioners in the use of data, algorithms, and research. I'm not going to read them all out, though. You guys can read that one. Although there are probably more frameworks to be incorporated, especially after hearing of some more fantastic frameworks over the last day and a half, these 7 were a great starting point. Across these frameworks, it was possible to see emerging common principles that have been applied to different aspects in the digital space, including whakapapa, kaitiakitanga, manaakitanga, kotahitanga, and angatiratanga. And looking at each of these definitions in the frameworks, how they're discussed in each of these frameworks, prompted questions, sticking on the theme, just questions, not answers, about how they might relate to digital identification. So, this is what they said. First of all, whakapapa and whanaunga. Here are a selection of quotes from the frameworks about this concept, and I'll let you read those so you don't get too sick of my voice. When looking to whakapapa in the context of digital identity, several important points became apparent. The first is that whakapapa is communal, emphasising that the individual can only exist within layers of relationships to others. Within my pepeha, or my expression of my identity, is the identity of thousands of others, all those who also descend from Tainui o Wākia, and importantly, all of those who will also descend from Tainui. When we identify ourselves online, we share personal validation, credential and authentication information, each of which has the potential to contain whakapapa. It's therefore important to consider what information an individual or community, as a service user, is sharing in each step of the construction of digital identity. This is particularly important with some forms of information over others, For example, biometric information, which we've also heard a bit about over the last day and a half. Secondly, whakapapa creates relational responsibilities. And these are wider than the individual, connecting Māori to people, and unlike Western forms of lineage, intimately connecting Māori to place. If the digital landscape is being developed by cultures that do not recognise such a connection, how can the relational connections between place or the non-human and Māori be acknowledged under the current digital construction? How can we demonstrate these connections in the digital realm? Thirdly, as Māori communities move from being service providers to being service users to being service providers, could whakapapa as a Māori concept of identity be used as information to register, validate and authenticate people? Could we use whakapapa to access iwi or hapu services, to sign on to a virtual marae or input into a long-term iwi plan? Whakapapa comes with certain responsibilities and obligations, meaning that within one's identity is also one's responsibility to others, to te taiao, and to the collective. And that leads on to the second principle, kaitiakitanga. Now, 5 of the frameworks highlighted the importance of considering kaitiakitanga in the digital landscape, and one other of the other frameworks mentions being accountable. These are some of the ways that kaitiakitanga is expressed across the different frameworks. In the process of colonisation, however, as articulated by Waitu Sixtu, Māori have been alienated from their kaitiaki obligations to taonga. So how can these obligations be restored or maintained in the digital realm? How might someone, in registering their digital identity, acknowledge that the information they are sharing might contain kaitiaki obligations? For example, how do I alert my father that I've entered whakapapa data onto a website? Or how could I show that an image I've uploaded, which might be of my wharenui, might contain kaitiaki obligations for other members of my marae? Metadata solutions like TK labels and blockchain provide potential models for solutions. However, enforcement of these are difficult, with international digital identification providers holding that information. Another part of kaitiaki obligations is ensuring that people, places and things are treated in a way that is consistent with tikanga. For example, maintaining their tapu status. So how could appropriate behaviour be ensured in the digital realm, particularly with the creation of digital twins of taonga, such as marae or waterways? Could secure digital identification appropriately restrict access to either those with kaitiaki obligations or to those who have consented to appropriate use? Perhaps in this way, digital identification can enhance the ability for people to exercise kaitiaki obligations, share knowledge, and encourage connection. The next concept explored is manaakitanga, which is raised in 4 of the frameworks and described in the following ways. If to increase mana is to is to treat someone with respect, how does this extend to someone's digital identity? Should my post on Facebook get the same respect as me in person? Should each part of the collection of data that makes up my digital identity get the same respect? And how is that possible when different elements of my digital identity, such as history, my search history, my age, my gender, are all bundled up and sold as consumer profiles? How, as a community, can we protect the information that is currently bundled up to create consumer profiles about us? How can hapu, iwi and community provide manaakitanga to the digital identities of their taonga? And in the registration of a digital identity, is there respect showing to the personal information provided by individuals and communities, and how the information is collected, protected and used? For example, are we sure we're collecting only the information we need? Do you really need my physical address when I sign up for Facebook? In validation, applying manaakitanga could make us consider the diverse ways that an individual or community can choose to identify. How can we show respect to diverse identities that may change over time? How can we ensure we're not enforcing identity norms on others like was once done to us? Manaakitanga implores us to use digital identification to empower, uplift and respect people, place and taonga. The next principle highlighted, don't worry, there's only a few more, is kotahitanga. Kotahitanga can be about both parties having a collective or joint benefit in the digital space. Is there a way that Māori communities can receive benefit from their digital identities? Could hapu and iwi receive benefit from providing or validating digital identities to the government or to other services? Kotahitanga also means working together. In terms of issuance and authentication, kotahitanga could mean creating digital identities that are interoperable across multiple iwis, particularly as tangata Māori may identify with multiple iwis. Furthermore, multiple iwis may have obligations over certain digital representations of taonga, so how can interoperability systems allow for this? Is there a way to create digital identities that are interoperable across Indigenous peoples to allow for the sharing of strategies, resources and ideas? And last, but of course not least, rangatiratanga. Rangatiratanga is usually described as ownership, control, jurisdiction and consent. However, control over the digital identities of tangata and taonga Māori has so far been restricted. As with data, algorithms and artificial intelligence, Western values have been infused into these systems, resulting in digital identities that harvest data or restrict definitions of identity. As Kiri just highlighted, we need transformative change, not incremental, and this needs to look at how we shift power. So maybe then, to truly achieve rangatiratanga in the digital identity space with no restrictions, iwi Māori could create their own forms of digital identification. What would such a system or such a tool look like? Now, digital identities are already being used to ensure that some taonga, when sold as goods, are accompanied with accurate information, helping to preserve the veracity of something when trading it and to protect intellectual property. How could this apply to tangata Māori? How could iwi provide something like a digital passport that allows uri to connect, access services and share information? Looking at the questions already discussed, all of the questions I've been posing, iwi passports could use whakapapa as a central part of identification, relying on kaumātua knowledge and iwi registers for verification. In the collection, storage and use of digital identification, iwi could show manaakitanga by only asking for necessary information, respecting the information that is shared, and ensuring that full consent is gained before any information is taken. In line with kotahitanga, iwi passports could be interoperable with other iwi services, or could be structured as a federated model where once your whakapapa is verified, you can use it on multiple other services. Further in line with kotahitanga, these iwi digital passports could provide access to benefits for users, could be an avenue for users to input into iwi plans, build connections and collaborate. To uphold kaitiakitanga, iwi passports could be used to share upcoming events, access digital twins of taonga, notify people of rāhui or restrictions in place. Iwi could live update services and information that is available to uri, uniting those of us who live away from our whenua and returning Māori to their marae in the digital space. Tino rangatiratanga in the digital identity is iwi Māori providing their own digital identification systems. And under the Digital Identity Services Trust framework, this very exciting possibility could become a reality. So, no reira. By looking to already existing frameworks that incorporate concepts from tikanga and mātauranga into the digital landscape, it's possible to highlight aspects that may also apply to digital identity and identification. Underpinned by the importance of whakapapa to our identities, tikanga means that there are obligations to care for the digital representations of our human and non-human relatives, ensuring the information that underpins these are respected and used for the benefit of all. To do so, Māori communities must play a vital role in providing digital identification. Although there's been a lot of warnings about how digital identities and the digital realm can be used against us, I believe that we can also use it for us. We can also work together to ensure we all are protecting the heartwood. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.